people here in upstate New York need to be ready, especially for the rainfall flooding impact.
Every hurricane season presents different challenges. It's unique. We never know really what's going to be thrown at us.
What are the chances that a storm like Irene happens again?
Very good, actually.
So people have to be prepared and know what their risk is as we go into each season.
Or you can see it on satellites, you can get other data, but to get the actual information of the storm is absolutely priceless to us.
The aircraft really gather the most valuable direct measurements we could get of.
You don't learn how to fly through a hurricane, you just do it.
Hurricanes are the largest storms on Earth, and right now we're near the peak of the time of year which these storms are most prevalent. Hurricane season can bring disaster, but what else do we know about these massive storms? Tonight, News Channel 13 will take an in-depth look at how they impact your community, your home, and your wallet. We'll revisit one community that's still recovering more than a decade after a devastating encounter. And we'll tell you what you need to know when the next storm hits. Into the Eye, sponsored by Marcella's Appliance Center. So when exactly is hurricane season? The Atlantic hurricane season is the period each year from June 1st through November 30th when tropical or subtropical cyclones are most likely to form in the North Atlantic Ocean. Peak activity within that hurricane season happens from late August through September, with a midpoint near September 10th. On average, 14 named storms occur each season, with an average of 7 becoming hurricanes and 3 becoming major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher.
The formation of hurricanes relies on certain factors and ingredients. More often than not, the storms originate over tropical waters. Tropical cyclones start as clusters of thunderstorms in the warm, open ocean. Once a tropical cyclone reaches a certain threshold, it is then classified as a hurricane. A tropical cyclone needs low-level winds to form, but they must be light. Weak wind shear is needed because stronger winds can interfere with the formation of a disturbance. A tropical cyclone also needs moisture and warm sea surface temperatures, specifically at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The warm water acts as fuel for the storm. Converging winds force the warm air to rise, then creating a weak area of low pressure. The moist air over the open ocean continues to rise, cools, and then condenses into large and tall storm clouds. The winds begin to rotate around the center of a cyclone counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. This is because of the Coriolis effect, meaning circulating air curves to the right because of the Earth's rotation. The circular flow of the winds around the low then forms a tropical depression. The next step in the formation process is for circulating surface winds to become more organized and reach at least 39 miles per hour. This is a tropical storm. A hurricane forms when winds continue to pick up speed, and then the sustained winds are 74 miles per hour or greater. Organized hurricanes have thunderstorm clouds and rain bands that surround the center. There is a cycle of rising and sinking motion within a hurricane. Mature hurricanes have warm and sinking air that generates the eye of the storm. The eye is still, well-defined, and relatively cloud-free. The eye wall of a hurricane surrounds the eye, contains heavy rain, and the strongest winds.
We spoke to Chris Gittro, the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service in Albany, back at the peak of hurricane season around Labor Day.
Some of the factors that we believe may have impacted maybe a little bit of a slower start than normal, than what we were expecting. Quite a bit of dry air from the Sahara Desert got advected west over the Genesis region for tropical storms. A lot of that has now started to abate. So as a result of that, we're starting to think the consensus is that we're going to see continued development as we go forward with the remainder of the tropical season here. So we're still very much expecting an above average hurricane season with the number of storms that do develop. And it's very common for now that we're past the halfway point, if you will, the peak, for the latter half of the tropical season to be much more active than the beginning portion.
The Hurricane Awareness Tour blew into Albany back in May, just before the start of hurricane season. Senior federal weather forecasting and emergency management officials, including the heads of the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, were on hand at Albany International Airport. There, we got a tour of some Hurricane Hunter aircraft planes that fly directly into the eye of the storm.
Each of those red hurricane symbols is a hurricane that this aircraft has been through.
The aircraft really gather the most valuable direct measurements we can get of how strong a storm is, how big it is, because they're flying right into the storm, directly measuring the wind speed, the wind direction, the central pressure. That information is not available from many other data sources.
This bulb off the back of the aircraft, that's our tail Doppler radar. And so that scans vertically from the sea surface up to the tops of the clouds. And as we're flying through the storm, we're taking these slices of data, kind of like a CAT scan.
Yeah, you think about this, you look at these aircraft, they fly right into the hurricane to get the data that we need. And the data gets into the models, the data gets back to the National Hurricane Center to help with watches and warnings and really get the information that we need. It is so critical that you get into the hurricanes to get the data right in the storm itself.
We've got the dropson data, we've got the radar data, any other hosts of instruments that we carry, everything flows through there and gets sent off the aircraft in real time. And so the sooner that we can get that in situ data off to the Hurricane Center, the earlier they can incorporate it into the models and the more accurate the forecast is going to be.
Or you can see it on satellites, you can get other data, but to get the actual information of the storm is absolutely priceless to us.
We have little strips of sandpaper, and there's one right here, and it's in front of that overwing exit. And there's two there, and then there's three in front of the main door. And so in the event we have to ditch the aircraft, and it's dark and you can't see, so long as you can find this bar, you can feel your way along.
It's really getting the aircraft out into the storm that it's like putting the probe right into the center of a piece of steak. You can probably see after you've grilled the steak how well done it may be, but you don't really know until you've inserted the temperature or probe to see what the temperature is.
And so we'll have two pilots up front, a flight engineer will sit in the middle, and as we're flying through, the pilots focus on keeping us straight and level and keeping us at our target altitude, and then the flight engineers will work the throttles to keep us on our target airspeed.
So the storms are made up of the same stuff too, but they're all unique, so you never know what you're going to get. So there's really no way to prepare for it. We just follow our regimented checklist and hope for the best.
I imagine you probably get the worst view and the best view at the same time as you go through here.
I definitely do. You're the first to see, and then you just gotta buckle down and handle it.
You don't learn how to fly through a hurricane, you just do it.
You just heard from Robbie Berg, the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Hurricane Center in Miami. One of his primary roles is to help get the word out on what hurricanes are, what kind of damage they cause, and why people need to be prepared for them during hurricane season.
So for folks up in upstate New York, you may not see a full-fledged hurricane always heading up your way, but even the remnants of a storm can still cause problems in your area. One of the biggest things is that the wind from a storm can often knock down power lines, and you can be without power for several days. And we know we see that in the wintertime as well with blizzards and other winter storms.
Dr. Kristen Corbacero studies the structure and intensity change of tropical cyclones. She also teaches atmospheric sciences at the University at Albany. Christina Talamo sat down with her as we reached the midway point of the season.
Everybody expected a very active season, or as I think one person said, a hyperactive season. And right now we've kind of come back to normal, that we had a very active June and July, and then August and September have been extremely quiet. So we've actually come back to normal, and it looks like we'll probably fall maybe below normal in terms of activity going into September. But there's still the expectation, because of the warm waters, as a few things make things more favorable as we move into later September and October, that activity will pick back up.
You've heard about the slow start to the season, but in the few days since we sat down for those interviews, things have ramped up in a big way. Still to come this hour, how Helene has already devastated portions of the southeast. And our area is familiar with the way these storms can ravage communities. Rachel Teedy spent some time in Schoharie to see how people there rebuilt their lives after Irene. Plus, Christina Talamo explains the scale we use to categorize hurricanes and what damage you can expect from a hurricane of each category. The 2024 season kicked off with Tropical Storm Alberto on June 12th. Alberto was a short-lived tropical cyclone which originated in the Gulf of Mexico. Despite being weak, Alberto was unusually broad, affecting Texas, Louisiana, and northeastern Mexico. Alberto's formation marked the latest start to an Atlantic hurricane season since 2014. Despite that late start, the next named storm has the distinction of being the earliest forming Category 5 hurricane on record. The second named storm, first hurricane, and first major hurricane of the 2024 Atlantic season, Beryl, broke many meteorological records for the months of June and July, primarily for formation and intensity. Beryl made landfall in Grenada as a high-end Category 4 hurricane, causing total devastation. The third named storm of 2024, Tropical Storm Chris, was a weak and short-lived tropical cyclone that brought heavy rainfall and flooding to parts of Mexico in early July.
We typically put out forecast information every 6 hours for every storm in our area of responsibility. But when we get storms closer to land, that'll shift to every 3 hours. When we get, say, a hurricane making landfall, especially in the United States where we have good radar data coverage, we'll put out something every hour. So that pace of information coming out of the Hurricane Center will increase, and so will our engagement and communication to the media, the emergency management community, and getting all that hazard information out.
So how does the National Hurricane Center make that determination? It all has to do with how fast the winds are blowing. A tropical depression has wind speeds of up to 38 miles per hour. It's defined at this stage as an area of low pressure with counterclockwise circulation in the northern hemisphere. When the wind speeds reach 39 miles per hour, the system becomes a tropical storm. This is also the point at which a storm is given a name. Tropical storms have wind speeds of up to 73 miles per hour. When the storm reaches winds of 74 miles per hour or greater, it's classified as a hurricane. The capital region is no stranger to tropical systems. Tropical Storm Irene laid waste to a large swath of our viewing area. First Warning meteorologist Rachel Teedy gives us a look back at the damage in Schoharie and how that community has grown in the devastation's wake.
Major storms have impacted the capital region and beyond. Here in Schoharie, after Irene, they installed these floodgates. These rise up when the floodwaters get high, hoping to avoid some of the damage. When water rushed through the Schoharie Valley in August of 2011, people didn't have a ton of time to react. NewsChannel 13 director Dave Wenberg was on call at the station that day, not expecting the storm to be as impactful as it was.
I'll get a full day of pay, we'll do a couple cut-ins. That'll be it.
Dave says the river was expected to go above its banks, but not high enough to hurt Dave's home.
And then I was here, and it got worse and worse, and the family had to leave. I even remember saying, we've done this before. It'll be, just take what you need, and we'll see you for dinner.
It took 2 days for Dave to see his family again. His wife and daughter evacuated their home, fleeing to a neighbor's house on higher ground. Dave couldn't get in. His family couldn't get out. There was concern about the roads and the bridges collapsing. And Dave was not the only one whose home was destroyed.
At my house, we were having water come through the basement in poke holes. So we eventually, left the area because the fire department had everyone evacuate.
The Village of Schoharie Mayor, Colleen Henry, said the day the sky opened was a crazy day. People in the village having to make difficult choices during evacuation.
We can't stay here. They want us to leave our pets. It's not fair. She's 4 pounds. They won't even give us a ride to Costliest.
Henry adds 90% of the village was underwater. Eventually, people were able to get in and find what was left of their homes.
It's still there. The second floor is anyway.
Dave and his family were able to take what they could.
There was mud everywhere and smell, all that stuff. And you saw damage, and then you didn't really see your house, and then there is your house, and then you're like, this is awful.
But the help was on the way.
We got a lot of help from outside the county, and now we're built back better.
The jail had to move, and Henry says the fire department had to rebuild its station, now with all the bells and whistles you could want. So Irene still has a mark on this community. It also still has a mark on Dave's family.
I know my girls don't want to talk about it.
But Dave says the storm changed him for the better, too. Someone started a GoFundMe for his family when they needed it most, and now he pays it back when disasters strike around the country.
Every time. I mean, it's just $10 every time, because I just think, right back, right back. Yeah.
No one can stop a hurricane or a tropical storm from passing through, but hopefully lessons learned from the past can help prevent more damage in the future. Reporting from Schoharie with coverage you can trust, I'm Rachel Teedy for News Channel 13.
The message we always tell people everywhere, every year, is that regardless of what a seasonal forecast might say, you have to be prepared every year for impacts. People here in upstate New York need to be ready, especially for the rainfall flooding impacts. You know, that doesn't take a major hurricane or a hurricane making landfall even along the northeast coast. It can be something that makes landfall in the Gulf. Like we saw in Irene in 2011, we had multiple fatalities in New York State from very heavy rainfall and flash flooding.
Still ahead, technology has steadily improved when it comes to helping predict the storm's path. Craig Gold will tell us why it's not as easy to know just how strong a system will be. And you saw the planes that take scientists directly into the eye of a hurricane. Reed Kisselbeck tells us how it all started with a barroom dare. Let's take a look back at the 3 costliest hurricanes to have made landfall here in the United States. Number 3. Hurricane Ian in 2022 raked a path of destruction across the southeast, devastating the Gulf Coast of Florida before making another landfall in South Carolina. At the time, Ian caused more than $111 billion in damage. That's $118.5 billion in today's money. The second costliest hurricane was Harvey in 2017. Harvey made history for the highest storm total rainfall when it stalled over eastern Texas for 5 days. At the time, the National Hurricane Center estimated that the damage cost around $125 billion. The adjusted cost for today, $160 billion. And the costliest hurricane in U.S. history is also the most infamous, Katrina. The Category 3 hurricane made landfall in New Orleans and the surrounding area in late August of 2005, causing devastation. A report in January of last year revised the total damage estimate to $190 billion, $200 billion today.
The old saying about $1 million, a mile to evacuate, it's a lot more today. And especially in urban areas, we have more population along the coast. So the more people that live on the coast, the more impact that we can have when it comes to the cost of evacuation.
The destruction that a hurricane causes will be different for each specific hurricane, varying based on the wind speed within that specific storm. Now, hurricanes are categorized on a wind speed scale known as the Saffir-Simpson scale. The damage that the hurricane could cause can then be predicted based on its category on a scale from 1 to 5. Now, let's start off with a Category 1 hurricane. This includes winds between 74 and 95 miles per hour with minimal damage. Expect tree branches and maybe some trees down, some shingles blown off, or power outages, but generally, buildings are left unaffected. Next, we bump up to Category 2, where winds are now between 96 and 110 miles per hour. Expect damage to roofs, siding, and windows, and trees down that could block roads and lead to major power outages. Going up to a Category 3, winds are now 111 to 130 miles per hour, making this a major hurricane. Now we're looking at major damage to the house, roofs that could start to lift off, doors could get blown in, coastal flooding is expected, and power lines could snap. Once we get to Category 4, winds are up to 131 to 155 miles per hour. Most trees are now falling, windows are breaking, there's significant damage to buildings, all coastal homes are flooded with several feet of water, and power outages are occurring that could last for months. Finally, when we get up to a Category 5, as high as the scale goes, Winds are now at or above 155 miles per hour. Shingles on the house are now gone. Trees nearby are all down. Roofs are blown off. Homes are a total loss, and most homes near the coast are underwater. With a Category 5 hurricane, catastrophic damage is expected that would make the area uninhabitable for weeks or longer.
We've come a long way in predicting where hurricanes will go, but figuring out how strong they'll be is still tricky. As meteorologist Craig Gold explains, intensity forecasting is complex, but the National Hurricane Center is encouraged where the science is headed.
At the turn of the 20th century, hurricanes were monsters in the dark, unseen until they struck. The 1900 Galveston hurricane caught an entire city unaware, leaving more than 8,000 dead. In 1926, Miami would suffer a similar fate. Scores of deaths, a city unprepared and vulnerable.
So you had meteorologists running in the streets around noontime that day when the winds were already increasing, impacts were already occurring, telling people to try to take cover.
Today, the situation is vastly different. Thanks to cutting-edge technology, satellites, sophisticated computer models, meteorologists can predict where a hurricane will hit these days before it makes landfall.
Today, our average track area at 3 days is less than 100 miles, whereas in the 1960s, that was nearly 500 miles.
But even as we master predicting a storm's path, there's still one crucial piece of the puzzle that remains elusive: its strength, rapid intensification. When a storm jumps from a tropical storm to a major hurricane in mere hours, it can still take even the most seasoned forecasters by surprise.
We generally know, the factors that are involved in rapid strengthening, but again, it comes down to really the structure of the storm. And I think that's one piece that we're still working on, is getting better guidance on understanding storm structure.
It's a deadly uncertainty. Hurricane Michael, 2018, from a Category 2 to a catastrophic Category 5 in less than 24 hours before ravaging the Florida Panhandle. Experts warn that as oceans warm, we could see more of these sudden, violent changes in storms, making breakthroughs like these all the more important.
The biggest change in the last 5 to 10 years has been on the intensity forecast side. So, for the last 30 or 40 years, we've seen pretty steady improvements in forecasting hurricane track. But we hadn't really seen that in intensity up until maybe 10 to 15 years ago. But we've seen a decrease in our average intensity forecast errors by 40 or 50% over that time period.
NOAA pilots, planes, and researchers fly into the world's worst weather. As we told you, data collected by the crews on these flights help forecasters make accurate predictions during a hurricane and help hurricane researchers achieve a better understanding of the storm's processes. Meteorologist Reed Kisselbeck walks us through the origins of hurricane hunters.
It all started in 1943 as a barroom dare when two Army Air Corps pilots challenged each other to fly through a hurricane. On July 27, 1943, Major Joe Duckworth flew a propeller-driven, single-engine North American AT-6 Texan trainer into the eye of a hurricane. Major Duckworth flew into the eye of the storm twice that day, once with a navigator and again with a weather officer. Duckworth's actions paved the way for further flights into tropical cyclones. On September 11, 1961, Hurricane Carla made landfall on the coast of eastern Texas, causing torrential rains and extreme wind gusts. Known as the most intense and damaging hurricane to ever hit Texas, Hurricane Carla is historically significant for another reason. It was the first tropical cyclone to have its entire life history recorded by research flights. Throughout its evolution as a tropical depression, cyclone, and eventual hurricane, Weather Bureau aircraft flew investigatory missions into the storm and tracked its growing intensity and the conditions of the atmosphere. The meteorological data collected during these first few years of flights helped scientists worldwide gain a better understanding of hurricanes, the atmosphere, and how the two interact. These aircraft, maintained and operated by NOAA's Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, were outfitted with very simple equipment by modern standards, just temperature probes, pressure sensors, and radar systems that gave onboard meteorologists an up-close view of storm dynamics. In 1976, a radar with Doppler capability was developed for these aircraft, giving scientists their first look at three-dimensional wind flow in hurricanes and other convective systems. When called upon by the National Hurricane Center to conduct reconnaissance missions, These specialized aircraft are dispatched from the NOAA Aircraft Operations Center in Lakeland, Florida, to identify the center of the storm and measure the central pressure and surface winds around the eye.
Coming up next, Juanique Martinez explains how model data is becoming increasingly useful in better understanding the lifespan of a hurricane. And Reed Kisselback will take us through what goes into New York State's response to severe weather threats. While a hurricane's intensity is based off its wind speed, the leading cause of fatalities is overwhelmingly due to storm surge. Storm surge happens when strong winds of a hurricane blow over the ocean, literally forcing the water to pile up as it approaches the coast. But the wind isn't the only factor in determining potential storm surge. The storm's size and speed determine how large a fetch builds with the storm, as a slower and larger hurricane can gather an enormous amount of water. The shape of the coast and the slope of the ocean floor also play important roles. A concave coastline helps funnel the water, allowing its depth to be more substantial. And a steady slope of the ocean floor can compound how rapidly water rises compared to a sharp drop-off. As the hurricane draws closer to the coast, the buildup of water begins to increase, causing a rise in sea level, often several feet above the normal tide levels. The combination of this and large and battering waves often leads to catastrophic damage, not only along the coast, but for miles inland, often leaving the affected areas uninhabitable. Almost 50% of all hurricane fatalities are attributed to storm surge, and another 27% from flooding due to rainfall, sometimes well inland. So while the focus may be on a hurricane's winds, keep in mind that water is the most serious concern, even in weaker storms. Model data is useful to better understand the development and evolution of hurricanes. Meteorologist Juanique Martinez explains.
Meteorologists use model data as guidance along with other forecasting methods to not only better understand the current state of the atmosphere, but also the life cycle of tropical systems. I spoke with renowned meteorologist Dr. Mark Barassa about this process.
The models are getting better and better, but they're not perfect. They need observations to fix some things they're doing wrong, to get them to start at a better initial condition, which leads to a better forecast. And the satellite remote sensing data is great for that. It gives a broad scale picture of what's going on. We can see the weather around the hurricane, which is an important part for figuring out what it's going to do next.
Satellite observations are not just used at the onset of tropical development. They can also be used for damage assessment after hurricanes. But even satellites have limitations.
The biggest problem we have is seeing through the rain. Hurricanes come with rain. And from in space, if we want to measure over a higher resolution in space, we need to use shorter wavelengths or a big antenna.
Dr. Barassa and his colleagues are making an effort to improve forecast data over time.
So we're trying to work with the people to help analyze and interpret the observation of the heat fluxes, the transfer of heat from the ocean to the atmosphere, and then we're using those droppings, things called dropsondes, to determine the heat fluxes higher up in the atmosphere.
Technology has continued to progress over the years and model data has evolved, but the task of mending holes in forecast data is a collaborative effort.
The ease of finding NOAA, NASA, and just partnerships throughout is improved tenfold at least over the last 2 decades. And one person can't be an expert on how all the parts come together, and the observations to boot. Getting the group of people together to work on different aspects has been a huge help in moving forward.
Real-time monitoring of weather conditions got a huge upgrade with the implementation of the New York State Mesonet, a network of 127 weather stations across the state that measure rainfall, wind speed and direction, temperature and humidity, among other important weather factors in every county in New York.
They're actually able to see what the hourly rainfall rates are, actually able to see if, anticipate better that flooding could be starting to be impacting a particular area, and also looking at what winds are being measured as a result of a tropical system that could be impacting our area as well. So we have a lot more data at the fingertips of the forecaster now than we ever had before as a result of the New York State Mesonet.
In the event of a major weather event like a tropical storm, the heads of many state agencies meet at the Harriman State Office in Albany. Their goal, to place resources and respond in a timely and effective measure. Meteorologist Reed Kisselbeck sat down with the commissioner of the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Jackie Bray, to find out more about how the state responds to weather events.
Since Sandy, we've had 15 tropical systems impact New York State. And we actually currently have 6 open federal disaster declarations in New York State for hurricanes or, major tropical storms.
While many of us think of storm surge and strong winds with tropical systems, Commissioner Bray says it's how much rain a storm brings that's one of the major issues.
When you think about intense rain, what we think about as decision makers is how fast is it going to rain and how much is it going to rain in a short period of time. Major flooding events are up 55% in the Northeast US over the last many decades. And so we do live in a new normal. We have to also be emergency managers in a new normal.
Since Sandy, the state has changed their approach, opening 9 new regional stockpiles, doubling the number of regional offices, increasing the staff by 50%, and building a cache of much-needed supplies in the event of severe weather. While there, we also got a tour of the Emergency Operations Center.
All these maps are interactive. You can sort of double-click in and get additional information.
This center is where the heads of many agencies meet and swiftly respond to weather events, decide where to send resources, and pre-position crews to help start cleanup immediately. Commissioner Bray says they are in a design phase of a new center which will help improve operations around these events. The department also continues to focus on how they communicate weather information and training emergency managers to be better prepared for major weather events. And the office's location on the Harriman campus provides a unique advantage: its proximity to UAlbany and the National Weather Service.
It's not only allowed us all to embed with each other during events, but I really think it's a model for the rest of the country. We have to, forecasting every day is becoming more and more about helping people make good decisions. And the only way to do that is to sit next to each other. And we are literally physically next to each other here in Albany.
Still ahead, have you ever wondered how hurricanes and tropical storms are named? Christina Talamo takes us through the process. And if a storm damages your home, will you be able to recover? Tessa Bentulin spoke to an insurance company about what you should include in your policies. Hurricane Debbie was a slow-moving and erratic Category 1 hurricane that caused widespread flooding across the southeastern United States in early August. Debbie made landfall in Florida early on August 5th. 10 deaths had been attributed to the storm, and preliminary damage reports are estimated to be up to $2 billion in damage. Hurricane Ernesto made landfall in Bermuda as a Category 1 on August 17th. The system then weakened back to a tropical storm before intensifying back to a hurricane and brushing Canada. At least 3 deaths have been tied to Ernesto, all related to rip currents along the east coast of the U.S. Hurricane Francine brought extensive flooding to parts of the Gulf Coast of the United States, especially Louisiana, in September. The formation brought the end to a significant quiet period in tropical cyclone formation in the Atlantic. Francine made landfall in Louisiana on September 11th as a Category 2 hurricane with wind speeds of 100 miles per hour. And does that mean we dodged a bullet with Debbie?
I think so. Unfortunately, some parts of New York State did not.
Right.
Steuben County, for example, they had catastrophic flooding in the Painted Post area, Addison area, so fairly significant flooding. And we got lucky in the eastern part of the state, but unfortunately in the Finger Lakes region, they weren't as fortunate as we were.
It just goes to show that, even just a matter of a short distance, there could be huge differences in impacts.
Ever wonder where hurricane names come from? Ever wonder when or if a hurricane will ever have your name? Well, even if the hurricane hasn't formed yet, we've known what its name will be for quite some time. The World Meteorological Organization is responsible for the names of all the hurricanes that form in the Atlantic Hurricane Basin. This includes 6 lists of 21 names that are used in a 6-year rotation. So the list of names we are using this year for 2024 is the same list of names we used back in 2018. The only time a name could change from one of these lists would be if that name was retired, which has happened for major, deadly, or destructive hurricanes, some of those names including Katrina, Wilma, Harvey, Sandy, and Irene. Since 1954, 96 names have been retired, with names beginning with the letter I having been retired the most. So if you've been waiting to see a hurricane with your name, but you don't see your name on any of these 6 lists, well, unless a storm with that letter is retired, you likely never will.
Other things we tell people is check your insurance. We want to know, or you want to know whether or not you're ready to go if a storm was to hit and possibly damage your property. You want to be able to have that comfort knowing that you have insurance already behind you.
Hurricanes are one of the biggest contributors to flooding. But Michael Brennan, the director of the National Hurricane Center, says it's not the only one. Just a few inches of rainfall can lead to terrible damage.
5 inches of rain and some of the topography here in the inland parts of the northeastern U.S. can produce catastrophic flash flooding. And that can come from any strength system. It doesn't have to be a hurricane.
We've seen it here in the capital region. When a storm hits, flash floods often happen. Heavy rainstorms are becoming more frequent with climate change. Andrew Pope with Brickhouse Insurance says everybody is in a flood zone. You just need to know how severe flooding could happen in your neighborhood.
Most of the time, the only people who are buying flood insurance are people who are being forced to buy flood insurance.
Most homeowners and renters insurance policies don't cover flood damage. In fact, Pope says only 20% of homeowners in the U.S. at risk for floods are actually covered by flood insurance. Rates for flood insurance go up slightly every year, no matter where you live. It's important to shop around to get the best price. Robbie Berg with the National Hurricane Center says check your insurance before a big storm hits.
I treat every hurricane season as exactly the same. Make sure I have my house prepared, my family prepared, so that when a storm does threaten us, we're ready to go. And that's what we would recommend for anybody living along the eastern seaboard.
After the break, you saw the devastation left behind by Irene, but that wasn't the only storm to hit the capital region. Rachel Teedy takes a look at some of the other systems that have blown through. In the last half hour, we showed you the power of Irene. But that isn't the only tropical system to cause damage in the capital region. Meteorologist Rachel Teedy takes a look at some of the other storms in recent memory.
Let's start back in 1999 with Hurricane Floyd.
It made landfall on the southeast coast September 16, 1999. Then it turned for the capital region. It was downgraded to a tropical storm by the time it reached us, but it still brought 3 to 7 inches of rain in parts of upstate New York. Some of the most incredible damage was between Route 146 and Willow Street in Guilderland. Part of Western Avenue collapsed in the middle of the night. As many as 200 boats may have sunk in Lake George. Chief Meteorologist Paul Cayano was on the Cape that day.
We wanted to have somebody on the front end of the storm, and of course with the Cape being right on the ocean, we expected high seas, and we got a lot of that on the Cape, only to come back here at the end of the day to find that it was worse here in the capital region.
Some areas saw record-breaking rainfall. Cairo-Durham, almost 11 inches. Bennington, almost 8. Hudson, over 7. Downtown Albany, 7.5 inches of rain. Several capital region counties were declared disaster areas in the wake of the storm, making them eligible for federal funding.
Fast forward to 2011 now. Irene had already devastated parts of the capital region and beyond. And then 2 weeks later, remnants of Hurricane Lee came through.
A little wave of low pressure. What was Lee, a tropical storm near the Gulf of Mexico, working its way toward us, pushing the precipitation back in.
Remember Dave from the last half hour? Well, they had sent their daughter to the city to escape Irene's damage and cleanup effort, only to then see Lee move through.
She needed to be somewhere safe, whatever. And Hurricane Lee came through and wiped out the southern tier, and she had to basically experience that.
Some other rainfall totals to share with you now over the last about 36 hours. Basically with this event with Lee, nearly 6 inches of rain falling down in South Carroll. Stephentown coming in at about 5.5 there, and 3.35 inches in Summit in Schoharie County. Again, the remarkable thing is that Schoharie County, at any given time, you'd say 3 inches of rain. Yeah, that's a wet day, but it's not going to cause this catastrophic flooding. The problem is that the ground is still so wet from Irene that came 11 days ago.
But it was Superstorm Sandy that brought the federal relief funds needed to create that program. That storm happened October of 2012. It made landfall in New Jersey as a post-tropical cyclone. It sent catastrophic storm surge into New Jersey and the New York coastlines. Flooding was as high as 4 to 5 feet in some places of Columbia and Greene counties.
Just tons of rain. You talk about Irene. These folks down here in the mid-Atlantic are going to probably experience the flooding on par with what we saw with Irene. But that's where all the rain is going to stay.
Stopping a tropical storm is impossible, but being ready for one isn't. Have your escape plan, have your go bag, watch your forecasts. Reporting for News Channel 13, I'm meteorologist Rachel Teedy.
We're very active on social media when we have any type of tropical system that could be impacting our area. We also work very extensively with our key decision makers, such as county emergency management offices, as well as the state of New York. We work very closely with the state severe weather risk communication center. That's recently been stood up. We're making sure that we have a consistent message with them, and we're trying to make sure that we have as many people on the same page with respect to what the anticipated impacts are, and we collaboratively work with many partners to ensure that the public is aware of any potential impacts that could be impacting our area as a result of a tropical system.
When we come back, what you need to know about what's likely still to come this hurricane season. And Monique Martinez has some advice for how you can prepare for a dangerous storm threatening your community.
I think that by the end of the season, which is not really until November or even early December these days, if the water stays warm enough, that I think we'll still end up above normal. Maybe not in that hyperactive season that some people were using as terminology, but yes, I think we'll probably still end up above average.
And that's another reminder not to let our guard down.
Correct.
Because a lot of the storms do form in the latter stage of the season. We've had so many impactful, whether it be tropical storms, hurricanes, or subtropical storms, even into the month of October this far north.
Correct.
And again, those rain impacts could be huge.
Right, and if La Nina develops as forecast, Paul, we're concerned that we could still have storms developing as late as early to middle portions of November as well.
When a hurricane or tropical storm heads your way, you never want to be caught off guard. Hurricane preparation is vital to ensure you are safe and ready when a storm hits. Prior to landfall, having a plan of action for your family and home is important. I have a few tips to help you feel prepared. Hurricane kits are a good thing to prep before hurricane season ramps up. Hurricane kits are essential should you ever need to ride out a storm. Here are a few items that may be helpful to have stored. At least a 3-day supply of non-perishable food. At least 1 gallon of water per person and pet per day for 3 days minimum. A first aid kit, medication, personal hygiene items, a battery-powered radio, multiple flashlights, extra batteries, and a whistle in case of an emergency. Make sure all of your devices are fully charged. In the case of a power outage, power banks or portable charging devices are also great items to have. Don't forget pet supplies for your furry family members, a cooler with ice, paper towels and/or large towels, and power-free entertainment for you and your family like board games or cards. Should you need to take care of any personal matters after a hurricane, keep your important documents on hand and sealed in a waterproof bag. If a storm is imminent, making sure your home is properly secured is the next step to ensure you are prepared. Secure your windows with storm shutters or a secure alternative. Seal any gaps around doors. Bring in loose outdoor items. If these items are immovable or unsafe for the indoors, anchor them down. Lastly, trim nearby trees to limit damage to your home. If you live in an apartment, there are certain precautions you can take to stay as safe as possible. Protect your head to shield you from possible debris with blankets, pillows, or even a helmet. Give yourself a substantial buffer from the elements and what's going on outside. In the case of a mandated evacuation, it's best to do so as soon as possible. Have an evacuation plan in place for travel and alternative shelter. Also, it's a good idea to fill up your car as soon as possible and have cash readily available if electronic payment systems go down.
So really just making sure you have supplies ready to go. When you go to the grocery store, do your normal weekly shopping, just grab a few extra cans of soup, some other non-perishable foods, put them in your shelves, and this way you have them if you ever need them during a storm.
After a slow end of summer, the hurricane season has ramped up considerably in the last few weeks. Hurricane Helene struck the Big Bend of Florida as a Category 4 hurricane just last week. And with Helene's devastating impacts across the southeast, it cannot be emphasized enough that the number of storms is far less important than where they make landfall. It only takes one storm to change lives and communities. Helene also reminds us of something we know all too well here in the capital region. Hurricanes may be at their strongest over the open ocean and often cause significant damage along the coast, but catastrophic impacts can be felt far inland, and even residents of the capital region need to be prepared. As we begin the month of October, the tropics continue to heat up. Additional storms, Isaac and Joyce, have formed, and Kirk is now gaining strength in the Atlantic. Additional tropical waves will be monitored into the fall, both across the Atlantic and especially in the Caribbean Sea, where activity normally shifts later in the season. Our team is so grateful to have shared this special with you. Thank you for staying with us through this hour. And if you missed anything or want to watch it again, you could always head to our website at WNYT.com, and you could always go to our YouTube page and our social media as well. Have a great night.